Battles of Liolia, The Last of Cal. The Last of Cal is dedicated to everyone fighting their own battle against cancer. Never give up hope. Stay courageous. Make new friends along the way, and know that you are not alone. All proceeds from the sale of this book will be donated to cancer research. Chapter 1. The Hunt. The deer was only 5 yards away. Speelton drew back his arrow to his ear. His hand slipped, and the arrow flew high into the air and got caught in a tree. The deer sprang off into the dense forest. Speelton fell to the ground in disappointment and threw his quiver and bow. Why can't I shoot a single arrow? He said to himself. In his town of Lorg, everyone had to be skilled hunters if they wished to survive. Since the woods around his village were full of beasts, food was scarce, and many of those who were brave enough to enter the forest never returned from hunts. Farming wasn't an option either, for Lorg had been in a drought for many years, and the soil was dry, with no rich nutrients. Most people never had the chance to wander farther than a mile from home. Speelton had mustered up every inch of courage he could, and entered the depths of the forest, determined to return with a creature big enough to feed his entire village. Speelton was 13, had short, dirty, brownish black hair, intense green eyes, and wasn't very tall or strong. Every day he would practice, but he never could pull the bow back far enough to hit a far-off target. Even when the Speelton drew the arrow back far, his arm would begin to shake, and the arrow would slip loose. The only other person in the village that showed any sign of caring about him, besides his mother, was a boy named Faveo, who noticed Speelton's inability and tried to help him. Faveo wasn't the best person to help him, though, since he wasn't very good at archery himself, but had a great sense of direction and could track down animals better than anyone else. He was considered a hero by the villagers, but no matter how hard Faveo tried to help Speelton, he just couldn't do it. It hurt Speelton to see the other boys outside at night with their fathers. They'd shoot arrows at targets, tell jokes, and laugh. He'd watch from behind trees, sometimes feeling as if he was really part of their conversations. Speelton imagined himself talking with his father, and how he would look and act. He pictured his father, with a loud, booming, but kind voice that laughed all the time. He imagined his father as someone who would make sure that he excelled in needed skills. But he knew if his father was like this dream father, he wouldn't have left, never to return again. Speelton had never met his father, but he could only wonder, if my father were here, if he trained with me, would I be a better archer? If he were here, would I have some ability for which I could be proud? All that mattered in Cal was for a young boy to be a skilled hunter, in order to help feed the hungry village. What Speelton lacked in archery, he compensated with his ability to skillfully swing his sword. That didn't matter in his peaceful village, except for the time a group of rowdy boys surrounded him as he walked along the edge of the forest. As they rushed forward with sticks, he grabbed a broken branch, and in less than a minute, all four were scrambling away. This was the first time he realized he had this ability. These rowdy boys made sure not to attack him again, yet they would mutter rude comments while passing by him in town. He lived his life feeling like a nobody, and was always sent to perform menial tasks since he was otherwise useless. One summer, John McMore, the best hunter in the village, hired him to exterminate all the rats that had infested his house after one bit him on the toe. Though Spilton had to stay true to his word, after capturing as many rats as he could, he set them free at the edge of the woods. Spilton felt sorry for the little critters. He always had to clean and start the fires for cooking, which he did not believe were respectable jobs. He felt that his whole life had been lived as an outcast. Spilton had never been able to accomplish anything his town thought was worthwhile. As he lay on the ground, with all these thoughts racing through his head, he thought of his mother. She'd been the only one who had ever cared about him, or believed in him, besides Faveo. If he took down a large deer, then she could finally be proud of him. Everyone would treat him like a hero. So he grabbed his bow and arrows and ran out to catch the deer. Quietly searching through the woods, he finally caught up with it as it was bending over. He crept forward and noticed that it was drinking, not from a small pond, but a lake that spread from left to right as far as he could see. When he was a young boy, he heard stories that his village was actually on an island in a lake, but he never believed them. He loved the stories that were told around the campfire. Some were about ghosts and ghouls, while others were about the dragons and daring knights. These tall tales must have been true, but since most people ventured only a few hundred yards into the woods at a time, no one was able to prove it. Deeper into the forest, there were far more predators. Now, he knew he would be a hero. Lorg had been in a drought and water had been rationed for years. This lake meant that water was available for the citizens of Lorg to drink and grow crops. But at the moment, Spelton had a bigger concern. The deer was just a few feet away. This meant that Spelton barely had to pull the bow back to pierce the deer's hide. So he pulled back his arrow, aimed, and let go. The arrow shot forward and struck the deer in the side. He shot another that bounced off a rock and struck the deer again. Spilton suddenly felt bad for the deer, since he was just an innocent living creature. But Spilton knew he had to have the animal in order to become a hero and feed his village. As he was thinking this, the animal fell into the water and began to float away. Spilton threw down his weapons and jumped into the lake. The deer carcass began to float into deep water, so he dove down underneath the surface and began kicking furiously. It was too dark to see anything, so he shot back up to the surface. Choking for air, he dove back down, stretched out his arm, and grabbed the deer. Once he surfaced, he realized that he was a good ways from shore. As he began to swim for shore, he saw two figures disappear into the woods. He thought little of it as he struggled to swim and pull the deer. However, once he reached land, he found that his bow and arrows were gone. His heart dropped. Spilton thought it must have been two of the boys from the village playing a cruel trick on him. But he knew that none of the other boys, not even the bravest of them, would travel out this far. Deeply confused and disappointed, as the bow and arrows had always been precious to him, he marched back into the woods, dragging the deer. Spilton had pulled the two arrows from the deer and held them in his hand. They were his last weapons, but he tried to forget that and set his mind on getting back. He began his trek back home. The sun was sinking down, and Spilton decided to climb a tree and look around, since he had been zigzagging to find the deer and had no idea which way he'd come up from. He set the deer down and began climbing. When he reached the top, he looked around and saw smoke rising in the distance. "Ah, they've made the bonfire in the village," Spilton exclaimed. Tomorrow my deer will be roasting in there. Suddenly, a dark shadow crossed over him. Two black talons grabbed his shirt and pulled him high into the sky. Spilton saw that the creature was a huge black bird with two saber teeth and rigid sharp feathers extending down its back. After only a short while, his shirt ripped and he fell, eventually crashing down through the branches of a tall tree until he gripped onto a limb. He slowly climbed down to the ground and looked around. Cut and bruised, he fell to the ground, panting and hard. What was that thing? Did I just imagine that? Birds are not supposed to be that big, Spilton asked himself. In the distance, he heard shouting, and deep inside of him, he knew something awful was about to happen. He had to have been far from the tree he'd first climbed. Looking everywhere for the deer carcass, he ran back to where he thought it could be. I have to find it, he exclaimed. It was my only chance at being a hero. Desperately, he ran through the forest searching for the deer, his heart dropping lower and lower. Finally, the sky went dark, and he had no choice but to head back to Lorg without the deer. The bushes and trees were constantly rustling, and sometimes he thought he saw piercing eyes staring at him. Having only the two arrows for protection, he ran on quickly, his heart beating rapidly from both fear and exhaustion. There was a strong smell of smoke in the air and bright light coming from Lorg. The forest was on fire. Suddenly, a tree crumbled down next to him, lighting more trees on fire. Fire spread around him, destroying everything it touched. Spilton narrowly jumped out of the ring of fire around him. Finally, he got to the village to find it in ruins, with flames everywhere. What happened? Spilton screamed. He wondered if the bonfire had gotten too big and out of control, but doubted it, since the Lorgs were always careful. Spilton ran from house to house, banging on smoldering doors, but no one answered. The houses were crumbling all around him. Flames licked his body. His boots burned on the cinders beneath him. He coughed, anybody. Then his worst fear was upon him. Mother, he cried. Spilton raced through the village with the scorching fire all around him. He came to his house, or at least what was left of it, and fell to his knees crying. The house had already caved in, and was completely engulfed in flames. All of his possessions, though they were few, had been destroyed in the fire. There was no way anyone could have survived this. If anyone was still alive, they would be struggling to put out the fire, and his mother was nowhere in sight. Spilton came to the hard reality. She was gone, just like everyone else. Spilton was alone. His mother, his friend, his village, they were all gone. Here, said a choked voice. Come. Spilton turned around to see Saul, the oldest and wisest man in the village, lying in his doorway. Spilton raced towards him. What has happened? He cried. We were attacked, Saul coughed, by the Calorians. The who? Spilton asked. How did you survive? I have seen the future of this land and many others, and knew this day would come. I was sent here by the Wizard Council to try and stop it, but their powers exceeded mine. I fear this land is in more danger than I expected. If you are to survive, you must take this. And he gave Spilton a large blue egg that was twice the size of his hand and had small red dots speckling it. You cannot let anything happen to it. Do you hear? Now run north. Whatever happens, run north. But how? Spilton stammered. But with a loud crack, The house became completely engulfed in flames, and collapsed on top of the old man. Clutching the egg, Spilton charged off. The last houses were burned completely to the ground. Flames were everywhere. As the fire spread, he continued to run. He looked back only once to see his village, his only home, the only place he'd ever known, and all the people he'd ever cared about. All were gone. The giant black bird, the figures disappearing into the woods, and his missing weapons were all clues to the big event, the event that changed his life. His heart had reached rock bottom. He was overcome with grief, and full of the fear of not knowing anything about the outside world. Spilton was alone, with no one to help him. The final words of the old man buzzed through his head. Calorians, wizards, flames. As he fell to the ground weeping, Spilton decided one thing. He would make sure the Calorians, whoever they were, would pay for destroying his one and only home.